Are we ready to get started? We're good? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vi Sanford, and I'm the Deputy Mayor. I will be chairing the meeting today. Mayor Borman is away, and he will be back next week. Before calling the meeting to order, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. In the event of an emergency, there are two exits from council chambers, one behind you to the main door, which leads to the hallway, and one to my right through the door here behind the municipal clerk's office, which leads out into the plaza. Our muster point is out in front of the plaza in case there's an emergency, and this room is equipped with two panic buttons. The washrooms are out the back door at the end of the hallway and to your left, and this meeting will be live streamed and recorded for public viewing. Anyone making a presentation or approaching the council dais or administration table will appear on camera. Lastly, we ask that you please turn your cell phones to silent. And with that, I will call to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole of Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. Looking to administration, are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Nope. Okay, thank you. With that, I will ask that for the approval of the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. And moving to item B1, we have a delegation today from AltaLink, and John Grove is with us today to make a presentation on some maintenance work and updates. Welcome, Mr. Grove.
Thank you very much. As was said, my name is John Grove. I'm the Municipal and Community Relations Manager for AltaLink. And with me today is Stephen Day. Stephen is the Senior Right-of-Way Planner on a number of projects that are being built in and around the neighborhood. Stephen's come to answer those questions that I will not have a clue how to respond.
May I just suggest that if he has anything to add that he come up to the microphone so we can hear him. We're being live streamed, okay?
Yes, we did hear that earlier, and we will do that.
Thank you.
We both work out of the Calgary head office, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy agenda. I know that I had to beg to get in here. I'm going to start with just a very high overview of the electric industry, how we're regulated, and how all the players fit together. I find that it saves quite a bit of time in the Q&A portion. So AltaLink was TransAlta. Prior to that was Calgary Power. We were created to buy from TransAlta the transmission lines in the dark blue portion of the map. We service about 85% of the population of Alberta. Now that's direct and indirect. So we bring the power to Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, where the EPCOR's and Max's city utilities distribute to the customers. We've got about 14,000 kilometers of transmission line. Just as a point of interest, Fortis Alberta, sister company, is the distribution company, and they have 188,000 kilometers in the same service area. They bring the power down the grid roads to most farms, residences, rural communities. You probably have Fortis as your distribution power here. We are owned by Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett, and it's quite a treat. It's been quite an education for us. Prior to that, we were owned by S&C Lavalin. Just quickly, the players in the industry. On the upper left-hand side is the Alberta Electric System Operator. They are the planner of the system, and they determine what's needed and when it's needed. So they would take the applications from all the generators proposed that want to come on stream, when they're going to come on stream, how they get connected to the electric system. They would plan for growth and load change. They prepare plans that are 20 years out, and they upgrade it every 2 years. They are not for profit, but they do show up on your electric bill as one of the administration riders. So that's how they get paid. As we go to the upper right-hand side, the Alberta Utilities Commission is the power industry's regulator. They are a quasi-judicial board. They are managed under the Department of Energy's provincial government. They are the ones that hear all the public hearings, make all the ultimate decisions about where new lines go, about all our budgets, what our regulated rate of return is, how we get paid, how many vehicles I can use in a year, those kind of things. So they're the budgeter. Lower left-hand side, transmission facility owner. That is AltaLink in the south, the dark blue area. In the north, it would be ATCO Industries. ATCO owns Canadian Utilities. Transmission lines provide the large volume power to the communities. So in voltage, from the top to the bottom, 500 kV, 500,000 volts, 240,000 volts. Those typically are the large steel lattice work towers that you see maybe between Medicine Hat and Calgary or Edmonton and Calgary. 138,000 volts, 138 kV. Those are the transmission lines in this area. They tend to be the two wood poles with a cross brace and a line across the top. Some 69 kV. 69 kV runs from Banff to Lake Louise, for example. It looks very much like 138 kV. Distribution facility owners, Fortis in this area, rural electrification associations, they were a relic of the past where there wasn't enough money in rural Alberta for the power to get from farm to farm to farm, so there was a co-op formed. First farmer brought it from the substation to his farm, next to the next farm, and so on. Distribution facilities, distribution powers are 25 kV, 25,000 volts, or 14.1 thousand volt, 14,100 volts. Sorry, that didn't sound right. Those are the wires that come down the back alleys that go to the transformer that come into your house. Your house may have 660, 440, 220 volt, depending on the service size. Consumption of electricity in Alberta. We're slightly unique in that between industrial customers and commercial customers, about 80% of the power that's consumed in this province is used by those two groups, leaving about 13% residential and 3% farm. We have a large industrial consumption power base. So we think about the big oil and gas compressor stations, those kind of things. This building is a commercial building, like the restaurant and those kind of things. Line losses are, if you put 100 in on one end and go about 350 kilometers, you get about 95 out, and you lose 5% of the power and heat. It just gets consumed as electricity travels. Quickly, the industry. On the left-hand side are the generators, and there are lots of generators around here. There's Spray Lakes. I think TransAlta is up behind here. I think there's an interesting discussion about that bridge and who might own it. There is Minnewanka and Tujack behind the Cascade substation. So those are the local generators. Interesting here, it's hydro. There's not a lot of hydro in the province, 6-7%. But there are coal generators, natural gas generators. Each of those make up roughly 40% of the generation potential. Wind generation, it's at about 8% potential, and starting to see quite a bit more solar come into play. Medicine Hat has some, Brooks has some, quite interesting. Those generators are not regulated. That means they sell their power for profit at whatever they can get for it. The market dictates how they get paid. And I'm not going to go into that because it's a long story, unless you want me to. Let's leave that for a minute. They generate power. It goes into the transmission system, the big blue latticework towers. It gets transmitted long distances, goes to a substation, gets divided down, goes out on the distribution lines. Transmission and distribution are both regulated. We are not competitive. We have effectively a service area. We're obligated to service it. We are regulated because we are the only one that operates in those areas. The regulator keeps us honest, reviews all our expenditures, all those kind of things. On the far right, we have the consumer and the retailer. And the retailers are not regulated. So NMAX, EPCOR, but Greengate, a number of these folks can offer any number of plans. It could be a fixed rate, it could be a variable rate, and the consumer is free to choose. So they, again, are competitive. So we're here today to talk about the transmission lines in the area, and this map shows the number of lines that come. This map really starts at, well, I think the brown on the upper right-hand corner is Cochrane, town of Cochrane. And it comes to a point where near 56L, that is the Ghost Dam, and comes from there, coming along to where we see the little white insert under the municipal district of Bighorn, just that little white box. That's about Seabee, where a number of lines join, going west on towards Banff. What goes south from Seabee, where if you see at the bottom of the page, 777L, that line runs over Hill and Dale, sort of beside the old Pigeon Mountain, and goes straight south to Natal into BC. So it services a number of mines up in the hills, and it's shared between AltaLink and BC Hydro. So these are high level what the lines look like in the area. All these lines are 138 kV. They are the wooden two-post structure, X's in the middle, and a crossbar. So we mailed out last Friday on 113L. L stands for line. I don't know why we always have to say that. Whoops. A few more minutes, get going. Speed up. So this is the first line that is being rebuilt in the area. We are rebuilding most of these lines over the next several years. This line starts at Seabee, going west to Lac des Arcs, coming into Dead Man's Flats, sort of Three Sisters area. The purple bits here are undergrounded through Three Sisters, and it comes out at the Spray Lake substation. So I've brought the packages that were mailed to the stakeholders. It is mailed to everybody within about 800 meters of the line, anybody who's impacted. This line will be rebuilt on the existing right-of-way in the same alignment as it was previously. It is being rebuilt with either of these two types of structures. One on the left is the H-frame existing. One on the right is a monopole. The monopole, you'll note, is slightly taller. These are about comparative. Now, the H-frame, or the two poles, has all three wires at the same height. The monopole has one wire, two wires on one side and one in the middle on the other side, it's got to be taller because the three wires are stacked vertically to make sure the bottom wire has ground clearance. Very quickly, this is the schedule. We're talking with stakeholders. We're talking with the planning folks at the town. We are talking with the MD as well. We plan to file an application with the Alberta Utilities Commission 2020. If the project is approved, it will be starting construction spring 21 and finished in the winter of 22. So it's 10 months-ish of construction. It won't be at all places at all time. It sort of progressively follows along. Quickly, this next line, the turquoise, is 54L. It starts at the north of the highway, at the Canmore substation. It runs across north of the highway through Harvey Heights and goes into the park. It's about half in the parks, half on non-park or provincial lands. This line is going to be rebuilt in the next several years. This line has also been identified as part of our wildfire mitigation plan, and it will have some extensive vegetation management done. This won't be popular. I suspect you'll hear about it. We are taking trees down on the right-of-way, not off, but on the right-of-way. When trees fall on these lines, the power goes out. And AltaLink, one of AltaLink's jobs is reliable power. I'll come back to that because I'm sure there'll be some questions there. Wildfire mitigation plan is at its infancy stage. It is, what we have done at this point is we've asked the government of Alberta to supply their high-risk fire area maps to AltaLink, and AltaLink has overlaid on those maps our transmission lines, and we are taking an aggressive maintenance program to ensure that the lines are in top-notch shape, that the vegetation is well managed, and this is largely a result of the California wildfires and the issues that resulted there. I will be back to talk in great detail about the wildfire mitigation plan. I suspect that'll be late summer, early fall this year. The second line, and these do not impact the town so much, 56 line goes from the Ghost Reservoir going north to Seabee. That is not impacting town, but it is rebuilding in the area. Most of these lines were built in the early 1950s, and they need to be rebuilt. It's time. The reason there's so many lines and the duplication is to provide reliable power. So if a tree falls on one, there's a backup and some redundancy. 150L and 3 line come out of the west side of Calgary, the Sarcee substation, and go to the Ghost Dam, and actually the power is largely going the other way from the Ghost Dam generation into Calgary. But that line is being rebuilt as well. And I'm sorry I went over time. Does anybody have any questions?
Does that conclude your presentation?
That does.
Okay. There's a question from Councillor Comfort.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I'm wondering, will you deconstruct what's already there and rebuild it, or will you fix up what's there? Like, will you replace what's there? And then the other part of my question is, what will you do with any debris from the rebuild?
So I think the short answer is yes, we will be replacing all the structures, all the wires. We will do it without power outages, so it will happen seamlessly to the end user.
Putting your mouth to God's ear.
Yeah, with a little luck.
Yeah.
So there's several sets of debris. The first one may be the vegetation management as we take down whatever's grown in the last couple of years. Typically, that's mulched and returned to the ground. The removed or salvaged power lines will all be trucked out and go somewhere. It's quite interesting. Often somebody puts their hands up and says, could I have those power poles? So that's the short answer. Yes, it's all trucked out and gone.
Okay, so if our municipality had a use for those poles, for example, I don't think we do, but if we did, would that be a possibility?
I think you could certainly put in a
Put up our
formal
hand up.
request, and yes, we'd sure look at it.
Okay, and then you mentioned that, with your permission, if I can ask something.
Certainly.
That the California wildfires had an impact on your mitigation plans for fires here. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, I'll speak at a very high level. California wildfires bankrupted Pacific Gas and Electric, an $8 billion electric utility in California. As a result of that, the California government had to put in place some legislation to enable, believe it or not, the receiver to operate the electric system. The receivers didn't want to do it because of the liability exposure. AltaLink is being proactive, and we are ahead of the curve in terms of what the government is legislating we do. We are looking at our whole system, identifying highest priority down to lowest priority areas that fires might impact. And we are starting with a line hardening or extensive maintenance program and an extensive brushing vegetation management. There are some additional pieces, and until I know exactly what they are, I don't really want to talk about them.
Sure. I'd be interested to hear about those. You said you were going to come forward later on in the year and talk about those things, so
Yes,
thank you.
and
Thank you
I
very
will
much.
be back if you'll have me.
I have a question for you. How do you service these lines now if you're not using wooden poles?
If we're not using wooden,
So you're replacing them with metal poles, right?
yes.
And so how do you service a metal pole versus a wooden pole?
How does the guy climb it?
Yeah, exactly. We'll get a technical review on that one.
So a lot of
Hoverboards.
times the metal
Magnets.
poles will actually have
Oh,
little ladder thing running up it, so they'll have a short gap, and then the pegs will be on the poles so they can climb them, or it be a bucket truck or something like that running along the line. So
Okay.
it depends what's easiest to get to at the time.
So essentially, you don't have to change your service technique, just you're climbing a pole in a
It's just a
different
bit
way.
different. They can't, the wood poles, they can actually just put their spikes on their boots there and climb up them, but the metal poles have to have already the arrangement in place, or they need the bucket truck.
Okay. How much distance is your right-of-way along that line when you say you have to brush it? The line runs through the center of the right-of-way, but how much is on either side of it?
So the corridor that's running along, actually in the Three Sisters area, has the 113 line, a Fortis line in the middle, and then the 76L line. So there's the three lines kind of running through that corridor. We usually plan about, for 138 kVs, usually about 20 or so meters with the right-of-way, with the line being in the center, subject to how long our spans are, because we got to allow for the swing out of the lines and making sure that that's not getting too close to trees. So what the idea will be that we're going to try and fit in that corridor that's already existing with the design of the new line.
But you're going to increase your clearing of the right-of-way?
Just within the actual right-of-way itself. So we have a right-of-way agreement all the way across that area, so we will stay in the right-of-way with our clearing. If there was maybe some potential that there's something mid-span or something like that. That might be a discussion that we need to have, or at the corners if we need some guy lines or something like that. There'd be some discussions there, but for the majority, we're planning to stay within our existing right-of-way.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Councillor Seeley.
Just a quick question about lessons learned from the California wildfires. What sort of prevention are you going to be building into this plan?
Preventions?
Well, if a fire happens, what do you look for to make sure the fuel is in order? Is there any lessons that
There
are obvious?
are a number of lessons that have come out of California. The first and most critical is communication. And we have kicked off a pilot project in the Crow's Nest Pass. And it's interesting that we're meeting with the DEMs, the Directors of Emergency Management, this week to talk about, in the event of a fire or a challenge with the electric facilities, how do we communicate, how do we deal? Our goal and objective is to use the existing municipal protocols in these emergency planning systems because you have them already in place. And we aren't going to reinvent the wheel. We do follow an incident command center model that's used all over North America to manage our emergency response planning exercises. We have some number, 6, 8, 10 emergency situations that we handle on an annual basis in managing all the transmission power system. So we're quite adept at managing it internally. The interesting part here is that it comes to the public and how it impacts the public and how do we best communicate with them. And that'll be part of what we're rolling out this summer to come and talk with you about. So you'll have a number of emergency planning systems in place. I can talk about a year ago, and maybe it was 10 months ago, we had an incident in the Banff substation where we had a cracked transformer and control piece. And we thought that we were going to have to take the town of Banff off power for a couple of hours, 2, 3, 4. In fact, we found a workaround where we didn't have to take Banff off, and I had to eat a fair bit of crow because I had sort of put the flag up and cried wolf, and Banff's plan had put people on every streetlight corner to direct traffic. They had a great plan. They had talked to the hotels to make sure folks weren't in elevators, those kind of things. So we will be back to talk about the detail of that when we know it.
Thank you.
I have one more question for you. How much of this proposed change will go through residential areas?
This is, okay, so this is not a change particularly. This is rebuild on an existing right-of-way.
Right, but you're going to change the lines out.
The
Okay.
right-of-way will be brushed or cleared, and I can't tell you exactly what the distances are. I know it's an issue in Canmore because I've dealt with it a lot, so I can't tell you that it's 12 kilometers, and I don't think it is 12. It might be. Do you know the number? I shouldn't have said that.
So we got about 9 kilometers of the overhead line that runs through that whole Three Sisters area. Again, about 4.4 kilometers of the line has already been undergrounded there through that section there in the past, about 2005 timeframe. So it's
Okay.
9 kilometers of the overhead that we need to do in 2 sections, one piece just by the Spray Lakes and then the other piece towards Dead Man's Flats.
Because most of this just seems to run through the power line area that doesn't have any residential
The
adjacent to
Three
it?
Sisters are kind of approaching the corridor on either side. Yeah.
Okay. And are we actually upgrading the power along this line, or is it the same?
It's the same. It's just be a 138 kV
138.
line. Yeah. It's
Okay.
just the new standards. As we build lines, of course, things are a bit different than the 50s. Things have changed, so the new standards have more clearances and things like that in place. So the poles will be a bit taller, that kind of stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing how that rolls out. And any other questions from members of council? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll look forward to continuing this dialogue.
Well, thank you, and I'll see you in the late summer or fall.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Just as a side note, I did bring some packages. This is what all the folks got in their mailboxes.
Okay.
that
You can
are
hand it
cut.
to the municipal clerk, and she can distribute it to us later. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item C, the minutes of the January 21st Committee of the Whole meeting. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none from council, I'd like to propose a motion to accept the minutes. Those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is item D1. It's the greenhouse gas inventory, and we have our presenter today, Amy Fournier, our climate change specialist. She's going to run us through the GHG inventory.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor and members of council. I am here today to update you on our 2018 greenhouse gas inventory. So here is our agenda. First, what I'll do is...
Can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor McCallum just stepped out, but she's coming back.
Okay.
So I'm sure she wants to hear the entirety of your presentation.
Very exciting.
She went to get toys, apparently, for the children in the gallery. Moms think of everything.
They do. Nice. You snuck out there. I didn't even see you go.
We didn't want you to miss any of the presentation, so here we go.
So first, I'll take you through kind of the why and the how of how we do the inventory. And then in detail, I'll go through both the corporate inventory and then our community inventory, followed by some details and some information about the data that goes into figuring this out, as well as some additional data and trends that we'll be keeping an eye on as we move forward. In addition, there are some external factors that actually have a lot of influence on our inventory, and I wanted to go through those with you. And then finally, what's up next, and then we'll have some question time as well. If at any point you have a clarifying question or something is really not clear, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of graphs. So if you just need to have a quick question about something that's confusing, please just jump in. But we do have questions at the end as well. Yep. Okay, so you have seen our greenhouse gas inventory before. When we did the 2018 Climate Action Plan, there was our 2015 baseline inventory that was done. So this 2018 is the first one since that baseline was set. So you have seen that it's in the Climate Action Plan, and it's been presented a couple of times as well over the years. So we have two inventories, as is common practice. So the first one is what we call our corporate inventory, and that is town operations. So town buildings, town processes, operations, the ones that we have direct control under. So that's our corporate. And our community inventory is for the community as a whole, everything within the town of Canmore boundaries. The reason we do these is twofold. One is that as members of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection Program, as well as our signing on to the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, both of those organizations have reporting requirements, so we submit our inventories to them as part of that work. In addition, doing the inventories lets us know how we're doing against our targets that we set in our climate action plan. So that is the way that we're measuring our progress over time. The protocols and methodology that we follow is set by something called the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventories, thankfully just called GPC for short. So that's an international protocol. Most communities follow that to do their emissions, so it provides comparability over time as well as to each other. So getting into it, this is our corporate greenhouse gas inventory. So the majority, almost all of our emissions here come from our town buildings, and then our water and wastewater treatment and distribution and infrastructure. So that's where most of that comes from. A small amount from streetlights and traffic signals, and a small amount from fleet vehicles. Between 2015 and 2018, there was a very, very slight reduction of 0.4%. That's really due to streetlights. So in 2016, there was the conversion to LED streetlights, and so streetlight greenhouse gas emissions dropped by 37% during that time. These also are our targets that we're trying to get to. So we've discussed before, but we have a 50% reduction target by 2030. So it's more aggressive for our corporate inventory because these are the emissions that are in our direct control. All right, we're going into some details here. So with buildings, our greenhouse gas emissions come from both electricity and natural gas combined. So I've put both of our consumption. This is our actual consumption corporately for electricity and actual consumption for natural gas. I wanted to just highlight this for you because it's important when we're looking at strategies for GHG reduction that not all buildings use energy equally. You can see, for example, that Elevation Place has the most significant segment for natural gas use, but is much smaller for electricity. So as we're testing out different strategies, what works for natural gas isn't necessarily the same for reducing electricity. So just keeping that in mind going forward. And our facilities team does a great job of this and has a lot of work that's really directed at getting under kind of the biggest piece of the pie. So this is how it all kind of comes together in terms of actual emissions for our corporate inventory. You can see that 2/3 of our emissions come from 3 buildings. So Elevation Place, Canmore Rec Center, and the wastewater treatment plant building. So those are our big 3. Interestingly as well, that this, our GHG emissions really relate to water. So heating water for Elevation Place and the pool, freezing water for the ice rinks at the rec center, and then treating and distributing water, both drinking water and wastewater, make up a bulk of our GHG emissions. I've put it in another way as well, in what fuel type are contributing to the GHG. So you can see here that electricity consumption is where 3/4 of our greenhouse gas emissions come from. So this is a good reinforcement that the work that's being done on all the solar photovoltaic installations that we're doing in our town buildings is really going to tackle our biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. We're moving into our community.
Can I just interrupt? You have a question
absolutely.
from Councillor McCallum?
You, Your Worship.
Want to go back there?
In that slide there,
Yeah.
so that's the 2018 with the implementation of solar on our 3 largest buildings. What do you expect that number to shrink to?
I don't know what the percentage would shrink to, but I could, we have
Ballpark.
We have the estimated kind of modeling that we're going to have, so I would have to go back and do the calculations before I'd confidently be able to give you a percentage, but I mean, it does tackle work still needs to be done about their Canmore Rec Center. I know that they were doing a bunch of structural assessments of whether the rooftop could handle it. So that building is still a ways out before actually getting solar. So we wouldn't see any reductions from that building, but Elevation Place will help out with electricity as well.
Okay, thank you.
So Canmore community as a whole, this is our 2018 inventory right here. So similar to our corporate inventory, about 60% of our emissions come from buildings. So these are homes, hotels, small businesses, buildings throughout our community make up the bulk of it. This gray is transportation emissions, and then the blue is waste. So it's estimated that there was about a 2% overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions between 2015 and 2018. But I do want to stress that that's estimated because the bulk of the reduction came from transportation emissions. Unlike building emissions, in which we can take actual energy consumption data from utilities and use that, transportation emissions are a lot less certain because we don't have great data. Transportation is the kind of bane of existence for all people who work on GHG inventories because a lot of it's based on modeling and assumptions and data that is less accurate than using direct energy. So I like to talk about our transportation emissions as kind of a percent of the overall and kind of what proportion they are, but I don't want to stick ever to a certain, this X number of tons because there is a little bit of inaccuracy there, just inherent with the data. And this is something that all cities face. I also included our corporate emissions here just for scale. So that was everything that we just discussed in all of the previous slides is right here. So you can see how they compare to the overall community. So this is important to flag because it's really important that we as an organization show leadership. It's really important that we set the bar quite high. But even if tomorrow we took our emissions down to zero, you could see that it wouldn't actually go that far in terms of achieving this 2030 reduction target of 30% because it is such a small piece of the overall communities. So it reinforces that we cannot tackle greenhouse gas emissions in isolation from the rest of the community, and it's really a community-wide effort that's going to have to happen. So I wanted to talk to you about the data that goes into this, and this is important for a few reasons. First is that we will likely not be doing another inventory until 2021. That's the next anticipated inventory year. That year aligns with the Canadian census, which will provide a bunch of others. So there's a lot of benefit in waiting until 2021. And in the interim years, we can still know what's happening because we can still look at all of the input data. The greenhouse gas inventories are like a highly aggregated, rolled up, high-level picture of what's going on. So in the meantime, we can still look at what goes into it and a number of other data trends that help paint the picture. I also spoke about kind of some of the uncertainty around estimating transportation emissions. The good news is that we have a lot of proxy data that we can use to know what's happening locally and get a kind of a more accurate picture of what's going on as opposed to just relying on kind of greenhouse gas emissions only. So what was happening between 2015 and 2018? We actually had a 6% increase in landfill waste. We had an increase in building energy. So there was a 3% increase in electricity overall, community-wide, and a 16% increase in natural gas. The reason for this one, the natural gas, is because the first 3 months of 2018 were much colder than 2015. So natural gas and ambient weather air temperature will always be linked. So on the cold years, we'll have an increase in natural gas. On the warm years, we might have a decrease. This is not part of the inventory, but we're paying some attention to how much we're spending as a community. And it's estimated that we spent over $28 million on electricity and natural gas. All of us, businesses and residents combined. And most of that leaves Canmore. Transportation. So this right here, the gasoline and diesel sales, is why we had a decrease in transportation emissions. So this is a GPC prescribed methodology. This is one of the ways that they let cities know that they can measure GHG emissions, is using fuel sales data. So that's from all of the gas stations within Canmore. So we estimate our emissions based on the fuel that they're selling. So,
I have a question from
Yes.
Councillor Seeley.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Sanford. Just about that, gas is very expensive in Canmore.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if it's purchased elsewhere. So.
And you're wondering, sorry?
It's probably, a lot of it might be purchased elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in Calgary that might work, but in Canmore it might be skewed
Yeah.
a little different. I know you're looking at measurements, but I just wonder about that.
For sure. So I think, too, that we just should acknowledge that that's likely the case, and it's probably lower than what is accurate,
Yeah,
for sure, because of that reason.
okay.
Yeah. We don't have any other data to go off of, unfortunately. So that is the best we got. So that did decline, and that was what led to those decreased transportation emissions. However, as I said, that even though we are limited in the data that we have that we can use to kind of create this inventory, we have other measures that we can look at over time that tell a little bit more accurate picture of what's happening locally. So some of those are actual motor vehicle registrations. What are the trends there? And so between 2015 and 2018, there was a 3% increase in motor vehicles registered to a Canmore address. So this is looking at residents only. Within that, we're interested in keeping tabs on what's happening with the EVs, electric vehicles. Currently, electric vehicles account for 1% of all vehicles owned and registered to a Canmore address. The interesting thing that will be happening is, while that number is quite small, is to look at over time the rate of increase. And it is quite significant. So this is what is being projected kind of globally within electric vehicles, is that there will be a rapid kind of increase in electric vehicle purchase and ownership over the next 20 years. Local roam ridership, we'll be looking at that over time. Local roam was not operating in 2015, and so the 46% increase was from 2017 to 2018. So these are some of the other proxy data we can look at. We're also going to be looking at mode share, where we have the traffic counters. So for example, at Spring Creek Drive, there's the traffic counters there, and we can measure mode share at those spots where we have that information. Another trend we're looking at is rooftop solar installations. So this is the cumulative number of kilowatts of a capacity that we have on rooftops throughout town. So this is residential, commercial, schools, and our own installations as well. Interestingly, I've seen this chart for Banff and Calgary, and it looks exactly the same. So it's the same kind of trajectory. There were some solar installations prior to 2014. We just weren't measuring it yet, so that's why the graph only starts at 2014.
But in this range, there were quite a few solar incentives through the provincial government.
Yeah.
So people were taking advantage of them.
What happens with without the provincial incentive at this time?
So the growth is really obvious if that incentive is there.
It shows the power of incentives. Okay, so this is one of these external influencing factors that I wanted to discuss with you, and it was interesting timing to have AltaLink talking about the electricity grid, so how fortuitous for me that they did half my work. But the carbon intensity of electricity is really important for our greenhouse gas inventory. So what carbon intensity is it's a measure of the number of greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted from every kilowatt hour of electricity generated. So this is a lot going on in this chart, but what it shows is the carbon intensity across the country of each province. And so you can see Alberta's over here. We do have the highest carbon intensive grid in Canada. However, it is dropping. The carbon intensity is dropping. I talked about it on the data slide, but our actual energy consumption went up, but our GHGs from our buildings only went up a tiny bit. It was very slight and not proportional to the actual increase in energy consumption and electricity consumption. And that is because of this reason, because the carbon intensity of that electricity generation has dropped. And it's going to continue to do so. So
There's a question from Councillor Comfort.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi. So I have a question about that carbon intensity forecast.
Yeah.
How much of that is to do with the oil industry here and the tar sands and so forth?
I can show you what's happening and what is leading to that.
Perfect.
There we go. This is a graph from the ESO, which is the Alberta Electric Systems Operator. So AltaLink talked about these guys as well. So this is our current electricity generation, and the orange here that I'm circling is coal-fired generation. So in 2018, there's this, I think they said 40% was from about coal, and then 2030 you can see that drops away. So that's what's causing the decrease in carbon intensity of electricity, is the move away from coal-fired. However, there is still 75%, both of the segments in pink are fossil fuel based. So they're just, it's moving coal to natural gas. So any work that we are doing locally to reduce electricity consumption is still really important, because the grid will still be about 75% natural gas fired. So to answer your question, a lot of the demand for electricity is from oil and gas work as well. And a lot of this segment here, cogeneration, from what I understand from the ASO reports, that's being used for oil and gas generation to supply those power needs. They also have, if you're interested in this report, there are, I think, 6 different scenarios that they mapped out, and a lot of that, the different scenarios are about growth, and a lot of it has to do with development in the oil sands. So what their generation capacity mix is anticipated to look at different scenarios of high growth and low growth. This is their reference case, so it's a kind of a fairly conservative one. So next steps. We will be officially submitting the inventories to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and Global Covenant of Mayors. The Global Covenant has a very specific kind of short window for reporting, and that's not happening until kind of early summer, so we'll be finished that then. And then, as I stated already, we're planning to do the next inventory in 2021. And the bulk of work now is just really on doing the work, and all of the initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the work on the 2020 priority actions that I had presented to you back in September, and that will be the big focus for now. So with that, I will end the presentation and ask if there are questions.
Councillor Seeley?
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Fournier. I'm really happy to see this work, and it's very important. Just wondering about comparables from fuel vehicles to electric vehicles, knowing what we know about electricity and how it's produced. Are we doing the right thing? I do believe, and I think we should move to electric vehicles, but at the end of the day, is it the right thing to do?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, is to ask that. As of right now, the research shows that there's still a 40% gain, or 40% reduction in terms of greenhouse gas emissions by moving from an internal combustion engine to an electric vehicle. So that's as it stands right now. So that will only drop as the carbon intensity of the electric grid drops as well. And then there's also the issues of if we're moving to renewable energy. So if someone is charging their vehicle in a home that uses solar panels, for example.
Excellent.
But at a minimum, it's 41% right now.
I do have another question. Sure. Just about organic diversion.
Yes.
I don't see it in the report. Maybe it is somewhere. But how do we, from waste, are we doing? Where are the measurements there?
Yeah. So organic diversion is an important one for waste. So while waste is only 7% overall of our greenhouse gas inventory, food waste is the biggest segment of our waste stream, and it's the most important to get out because it generates methane. So food waste has kind of a disproportionate impact in terms of climate change on waste. So that's, it is the single most important initiative from waste.
And moving forward, we'll have that added to.
Yeah, as one of the, and we can report back specifically on that and the amount of emissions that we, based on how much food waste we're removing from the waste stream, we can estimate how many emissions are or the emission reduction resulting from that. But as we just launched the pilot in 2019, like there was nothing on this because this is kind of a snapshot of 2018. Yeah. There will always be a lag between inventory years and when they're reported, just because it takes a while to get the data and then to do the analysis and the work. So it's almost kind of like we're almost a little behind.
Yeah.
Councillor Hillstad?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. Have we looked at like carbon sinks? So since trees are one of the bigger, I think oceans are the biggest, and then trees are one of the next bigger ones. Like since Canmore tends to have a fair amount of trees with the surrounding area, have we looked at those numbers at all to see if the carbon we're producing is being captured, or how much is actually going out? Or it's like I could see other cities where there's no, or a lot less trees, them having a much bigger impact on the GHGs actually getting out into the atmosphere, whereas Canmore might be more well suited to be capturing some of that? Like, do we have any numbers on?
Not that I've seen. It doesn't come into play for this specifically because, again, this is really prescribed by an international protocol that's very specific to sources. And when you get into sources versus sinks, it can be quite complicated because those trees were existing before most of them were existing before kind of we came along and started emitting. And so in terms of credit versus your inputs, and also most of these trees, like they're in our surrounding area and we benefit from them, but they're not within necessarily the town boundaries. Those are in parks and whatnot. So it's a lot of assumptions and modeling and things that we necessarily couldn't take credit for. And then there's also the issue of what happens if there's a forest fire and whatnot. So we couldn't take kind of credit for these trees and apply them against our emissions. So one, there's no protocol that kind of speaks to that, and two, a lot of them aren't within our borders or controlled by us or because of us. They were existing before.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? It was interesting that the AltaLink presentation included that this area generates electricity from hydro, which I guess I didn't really realize that we were that unique or that distinct. But that goes back into the grid and then it's redistributed throughout the province. But it's interesting that our hydro generation is in this area, but we're still part of the coal-fired electricity.
It's all kind
system.
of shared. So
Yeah.
all of the inputs, regardless of where they come from, kind of are shared amongst the province. So, conversely, people in Fort McMurray or Medicine Hat also benefit from the hydro that's created down the road from here.
Well, I noticed that there was some recognition that Banff does a different type of analysis of their fuel, because they do take into consideration that 51% of their total emissions come from visitor vehicles and 5.8 from local vehicles. So is there some direction that you're going to be moving towards in 2021 to kind of capture that information in our audit?
Potentially. With Banff, they have traffic counters. So they have park gates, so they can do a bunch of modeling based on park gate data, and they also have traffic counters when at different spots coming in and out of their town. So they can actually get a fairly, a much more accurate picture of what's happening there. So we don't have those. So we would not be able to follow the same methodology that Banff has done. So it's interesting that Banff has done that work, and we benefit from it because we know that great, because they have done this and our similarities with Banff, that we can assume that our, especially with the visitor impact, our transportation emissions are higher than what we are able to measure. But it would take a lot to get to that point because they have a lot more infrastructure available to them with the traffic counters than we have. And there's also the question of, who owns that? How much are we responsible for as a town to kind of own and manage, and then try to develop strategies for that transportation impact. And as you saw in the Banff report, I think it was 51 and 4%. So it's quite, the 51% is visitor traffic, specific to visitors. So is the town of Banff on their own responsible for that? Is the town of Canmore responsible for that visitor impact alone? Or is that a broader conversation with other partners and stakeholders? So
But I
there's a
think
lot
we
to
are-
unpack in that.
We are strategically moving towards mode share and transit and all those things that affect that kind of transportation.
For
I
sure.
mean, that's an impact to us, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the other question to ask, is that for the amount of effort and money that it would take to start measuring that, would we change what we are doing? And I would suggest no. I think from a climate change perspective, that the work that our transportation department is doing is exactly right. Like, they're doing all the right things with free transit and the work on mode share and trying to really make a fantastic walking and cycling network. So those are all the things that we would do if we had that data. So that's the other consideration.
So I don't see any other questions from council. Thank you very much for your presentation, and
Thank
we
you.
look forward to moving forward with this. This is great. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item D2, the snow event debrief. And I believe we have Mr. Jordy Heel today with us, who's the supervisor of streets and roads, and he's going to lead us through the debrief on what happened and where we're going with this.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Deputy Mayor and councillors. I am here to talk about a little snow event that we had pre-Christmas, December 2019. What I will do is ask that I go through the presentation first and run through questions after, if that's all right. And before I do start, there are a lot of references made to the term SNIC, S-N-I-C, snow and ice control, is what that is referring to. So as we move through and I say SNIC, that's what we're getting at. So in this presentation, I'll talk about the snow event details, like what happened here at the end of December and how we dealt with it. I'll give you some background information on the policy and how we tend to manage SNIC in town on various infrastructure. We'll talk about the response, so leading up to and during the event, and then after the event occurred. We'll discuss the financial impacts, both for the specific event and how it impacted the 2019 and 2020 budget years. There was a year end in there that had a bit of an impact in there. And then the key learnings that we can pull from this event. So, snow event details, what happened? On Friday, December 20th, it started to snow heavily. It continued on until about the February 22nd, which was the Sunday. We received approximately 45...
Sorry, that was December 22nd.
Sorry, what did I say?
February 22nd.
Sorry, December 22nd. I'm stuck in today. We received approximately 45 to 60 centimeters of snow during that time, and there was rain mixed in there on the Friday night, and temperatures right around 0 degrees, which made things challenging, increased driving hazards, cars driving on the heavy snow, packing it down, and then literally flooding it, making an ice rink. And there was increased traffic in town due to the weekend just prior to Christmas. So some background information. We have had a new snow and ice control policy that was implemented and passed on July 2nd, 2019. Some of the key changes in this policy are the fact that we separated out our SNIC categories into roadways, the active transportation network, which includes public transit and pathways and public sidewalks and whatnot, and then we have public facilities. We changed the response times, or we addressed the response times with the new policies. So priority 1 items, we respond within after 2 centimeters of accumulation, and the goal is to have everything cleared after 24 hours. For priority 2 items, we respond after 5 centimeters, and the goal is to have the roadways and systems cleared within 48 hours. We addressed additional infrastructure such as emergency accesses and handicap stalls, bike corrals, in-street bike lanes. We addressed snow removal decision-making, so I should clarify snow removal versus snow plowing. Plowing is actually plowing the snow from the roadway, moving it off to the sides or into the center, whereas removal refers to actual physical removal of that snow. And we addressed or acknowledged snow emergencies, some criteria on how we might respond to a snow emergency. SNIC is managed on roadways via Volker Steven, the private contractor that we have managing all streets and roads, snow and ice control. The active transportation system is managed by the streets and roads staff. And public facilities, so for example, this facility or Elevation Place, it's managed, snow and ice control is managed per facility by staff working at that facility. To elaborate on the streets and roads staffing that work on the active transportation network, we have 6 staff in the area, and we provide 7-day per week coverage. For the active transportation network, we do get some help from a private contractor for handicap stalls. I should just point that out. 2 maps. These are operational maps. What I wanted to do here is just highlight on the left, you can see this is a map of roadways, and the high number of brown road sections there are priority 1 items. We do have 77 kilometers of priority 1 roadways in town. We have 6 kilometers of priority 2, so I should back up and say that priority 1 roadways includes arterials, collectors, school bus routes, school zones, public transit routes. Priority 2, which there are a lot fewer of these, this is things like industrial areas. Priority 3 items, we have 60 kilometers of those, and those consist of local roads, parking lots, and laneways. And then the active transportation system, we have 48 public transit stops. So these are priority 1 items, which had an impact on how we dealt with that particular storm. And we have 47 kilometers of pathways and trails and public sidewalks. So I wanted to put out a couple of charts here. This chart highlights snow received, snowfall, and snow days. So to digest this, the blue refers to snow accumulation or snowfall received, and the black lines refer to number of snow days. So a couple of highlights. This is 2019. This is the year 2019. A couple of highlights here would be, in April we've got a large spike. We had 80 centimeters of snowfall over 20 days in April. In September we had 37 centimeters over 5 days. October, we had 47 centimeters over 18. November, we had 54 centimeters over 7 days. And in December, we had 61 centimeters, the bulk of it received right at Christmas there, over a total of 11 days. And where this graph becomes telling is when you compare it to the last 10 years. So this chart goes back to 2009. And if you just look at the black lines, they're fairly similar for the last 10 years, meaning the number of snow days that we typically get. But what you can see in the last kind of year and a half is the large number of snow we have received over a relative few number of days. I will point out that I highlighted the 2019 section there, the back half of 2018, or where the first large increase was my first day with the town of Canmore. So the timing was nice. It's been busy. So I'll talk a little bit about the response. So leading up to this event, we're always monitoring forecasts. I think it's safe to say that we received more snow in this event than was anticipated. We look at how we're going to deploy internal staff. Who do we have available? What contractors do we have available? This event, in that it happened just before Christmas, was challenging. We had a couple of staff on holidays. Available contractors also had staff on holidays. I mean, we had Richard Bremner running the grader himself, which speaks to his grader operators were out of town, and we had to get this dealt with. We had the streets and roads and parks staff. We did receive some support from internal staff with parks. We managed the transit stops and the trails. So one of the key things to point out here is that with 48 transit stops as a priority 1 item, virtually everybody available from the town was deployed on transit stops. So it left the pathway system. The situation identified here is we have trained operators of our equipment that could be running on pathways, and we had to deploy them on the public transit system, which is important. It was just, it caused an effect for being able to deal with the trail system. The town of Canmore also supplied a grader to Volker Steven, who had 2 plow trucks out. This is their standard service delivery, is to supply the town with 2 plow trucks. And then we had additional contractors in town managing handicap stalls. We had another grader deployed, skid steers, loaders, and multiple trucks that were out during the 3 days in particular, and then subsequently after. With regard to our response, we'd received a significant snowfall. We had already received significant snowfall in Q4 of 2019, which you could see on the first chart that I put up. All areas literally required service, and we assessed these areas daily. Virtually everything was immobilized. So when we talk about prioritization, and we want to move essential services around, and ambulances and fire trucks, literally nowhere was accessible in this situation. So we had to prioritize snow plowing and removal. And also, this was an early season event, so there was some thought and consideration given to future mitigation. Like, what if we received more snow in the next 2 to 3 months, which, mitigating against drainage and future incidents on roadways, snow stockpiled in roadways, for example. We stockpiled snow where it was possible to do that. In many cases, it was difficult. The image there, I circled, this is what happens when we started stockpiling this amount of snow in town. We start to get reduced visibility, sight lines, for example, at intersections. It leaves little choice but to move some of this stuff out of the way to, make driving easier and safer. This plowing and removal continued for several weeks. So we are continuing to remove snow. We still have snow stockpiled around South Canmore, for example. We continued on till about the second week of January with this particular event. We removed on average 50 to 70 truckloads of snow per day. This is a total of 1,500 truckloads removed from our roadways, or 18,000 cubic meters. So to put that into perspective, if you took a football field and stacked it 4 meters high with snow, it would give you sort of a relative term to look at how much snow we removed from the town road system. We'll look at the financial impacts here. So the first chart talks about the event-specific details. So this event cost the town of Canmore in the neighborhood of $275,000 to $300,000. The materials that were used are not yet reconciled yet from the January numbers. So the way we budget for SNCC is for contracted services and for materials. So I'll get to the budgets in a minute here, but from a 2020 perspective, you can see that we've used $160,000 of our contracted services budget for 2020, or 46% of that budget already. Historically, I've brought up the last 5 years to take a look at. This, in 2019, our SNCC cost the town of Canmore $570,000. This is a $116,000 variance over budget. We were over budget by $116,000. I should point out that $20,000 of that was contracted services, and the vast majority, or around $100,000, was for materials. So there was a lot of material used on the roadways. A lot of that was used in the early part of the year when we had the cold temperatures in February. There's no snow to plow, but there's a lot of mitigation that we have to do with materials at that point. Also, relative to this chart, you can see that there's a 5-year under-budgeted trend. We have been under budget. Of course, snow events and snow and weather in general is very difficult to predict.
Councillor McCallum has a question.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Hill. I was wondering if you could, I've asked this question during budget time, but it's been a few years. What is the black magic in terms of providing what a budget amount should be for snow and ice removal through your department that you undertake? Like, if you look at those, the trending numbers, you see that it's a different number every year. It's not that we slap the same number on every year, but what is it that goes into creating that budget number?
I've got Mr. Camo, who has indicated he'd like to speak to this.
Yes, I would. I'll just take some of that pressure off Mr. Hill. He unfortunately wasn't here for the last budget cycle, so so I thought I would step in and just, what we've done in the past is we've looked at the last 4 years of trending actual costs, and that's helped determine what we forecast will be for the coming budget cycle.
Is there any,
Sorry.
is there any sort of consideration to, oh, we haven't been hammered in 4 or 5 years, we might get hammered this year within that budget, which is not very scientific nor incredibly defensible, I understand that, but I just wondered, because I get that question.
Certainly going forward, especially as the graph that Mr. Hill has shared with council today, that is the trend now that we should be planning for snow events that have much more substantial snowfall. And so it's not just moving the snow to the sides of the roads, it's actually removing it so that we have adequate storage to get us through the winter. So certainly going forward, a lot of the data that Mr. Hill has collected and that we've learned from this will make its way into the next budget cycle this fall.
Perfect. Thank you so kindly.
I have an additional question from Councillor Comfort.
Yes, thank you. So I'm wondering about budgeting for equipment. How do you factor that in? So that we have contractors, I know, but what about our own equipment for the town of Canmore?
Being aware that we have trends that are going to be much more challenging to deal with, certainly as we prepare and develop for the 2021-2022 budget, we'll be looking at all of those things, not only contracted services, which will be coming to council shortly as we've gone out to requests for proposals. We'll also be looking at what we have as far as equipment and resources and the opportunity to look at contracted services as well so that we could provide more appropriate service levels based on where we see trending goes for snowfall events.
I have another question, but I can hold it till the end, if that's better.
Go ahead, why don't you just ask it now?
Okay, I
Okay,
just
just a
wondered,
moment. I have to get, oh, you got your microphone, okay.
yeah, I just wondered, I know we placed snow shovels at various locations for people to use if they were feeling like they needed some exercise. Were those deployed, and would we consider increasing that?
So we deployed 9 of those. There were 17 locations that we could deploy those on. We lost about 4 of them within the first month, I would say. We did, though, see people using them, and the post office, for example, or the Canada Post, for example, were high users of these things, clearing the boxes close to the transit stops. And honestly, people use them. I think the recovery cost on a snow shovel, if you can get somebody to shovel a pad once or twice, when you think of what it takes to deploy people and equipment and trucks to get to that situation. I mean, was it a resounding success? I don't have real hard data on that, and we definitely could do more of that. I thought it was a good community building initiative. I think we did see some success, but going forward, I think we just need to look at whether or not we want to do that again.
And maybe some more communications, perhaps, in that regard, that you don't want to wag a finger at people, but it'd be nice to encourage them in good behavior, I think.
Right. I think when I get to my first point on the next slide of the key learnings for this whole event was communication was a big learning area for us in this event in particular. Conveying the message from operations out to administrative staff locally within each building, and then the communication staff with the town of Canmore, and getting that message consistent through social media and whatever other channels we have was a big learning. That was an area that we can definitely do better. There was a lot of focus on the ground from the operations side, and that was an area that needs improvement. Also, staff training. Currently, we have 1 grader operator within the S&R team, Streets and Roads team, and we need to build that up as well so that we have more of those individuals on staff. It does take time and it does take expense, obviously, but the offset is positive to doing that. Also, addressing staff scheduling on December 25th and 6th. So the available staff that we did have and contractors that we did have, they were, heavily worked leading up to Christmas. We didn't deploy staff on the 25th or 26th. I had 1 staff member on call available to me. There are working alone considerations in that situation. But it's something that speaking about a learning from this event, that's something that we could look at going forward to figure out and think about what gets us more successful over that type of a period. You can't plan when these events occur. Also, adapting our SNCC strategies to a changing climate. I think the last 2 years or year and a half in the 10-year chart I showed you there is, how much of this are we dealing with going forward? This is, consistent over the last 2 years, but I mean, adapting the way we manage our snow and ice control to a changing climate. Also, evolving road design and transportation methods. In Amy's presentation, we talked about increasing ridership on the transit system. That will likely include more stops. Rome had a lot of trouble with the roads in this scenario. When they pull off to the side of the road, it's difficult for them to get back out, and it's tough to move that snow anywhere effectively. We have a lot of parking in the roadways, as you know. Interesting stat I noticed from the last one was the small increase in vehicle registration. So, vehicle registrations are growing. We're seeing more people driving in general, and they are parking on our roadways, which makes it difficult to move snow around. And also laneways as a primary access. So we've seen a lot of that in the town where people have their laneways are their primary access. Currently, we have these as a priority 3 item, and adapting our snow and ice control to that as we grow as a community. And lastly, developing a snow emergency plan. So in the policy, there are some guidelines for managing a snow emergency. We don't have a hard and fast snow emergency plan. And I think we can, a learning from this event is identifying the stakeholders that need to be involved, building an effective communication plan, and establishing trigger points for implementing this snow emergency strategy. So putting thought after our learnings from the event, into a successful system moving forward. And with that, I'll wrap up the presentation and take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you. There was a lot of moving parts to this one, and it seems like the timing was so incredibly inconvenient because there were so many more people in the community. It was a weekend, and then it went into Christmas, and you guys were just out there trying to deal with all that, and I commend you because it must have been a very hard thing to do.
Thank you.
The whole process went on for quite a long time though, right? Because you were removing snow well after the event was over, but you're still dealing with piles of snow. I mean, people are piling snow in the streets, and there's still piles of snow where people should be parking. Do you have any suggestion as to how we could better communicate, you know, what people do in their
With
own, with that snow in their own front yards?
I mean, we can put some thought into that. And how we get that out to the public, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, people are piling snow in the street.
Right.
So now we've got these very narrow corridors, and there's a huge volume of snow. It doesn't melt that fast, right?
I mean, currently it tends to be what individuals do, and when you see areas like Hospital Hill, for example, and that melts and runs downhill and refreezes, we get icy situations. In terms of getting that, what's that?
Dump it in the swale, man.
This is, I mean, I need to get together with Robin and Adam too and talk about what is an effective way to communicate that messaging. And then establishing what it is that we want to do with that snow is also important. You know, a lot of people don't have places to put it on their front yards, and they can't move it just just off the sidewalk. There's just, you know, an event like this, there was just too much snow for that.
So could that be part of the emergency plan then too? Like where you dispose of your snow?
Yeah, I think the emergency plan would be about access primarily. So can we move, I mean, my street, for example, has got the snow piles all over the place. And I mean, when I look at that street and make that assessment, I can get a plow through there, equipment can get through there. I mean, we need to address that when we talk about what are we doing with snow going forward.
Okay. Question from Councillor Comfort.
Yes, thanks. Great presentation, thank you, and thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
It's never going to be enough, so just for everybody else, but I recognize the difficulties. So my question is, there were a lot of vehicles parked on the street, I think partly because it's that time of year and people have a lot of visitors coming and there's no room left in the driveway. Would it be helpful if around this time or prior to a snow event, bylaw stepped up there, no parking on the street? What's the restriction? Is it 48 hours? 72 hours? Or just said snow emergency coming, move your vehicle, or I don't know. Would that be one of the tactics that you might be able to adopt?
Yeah, this would be like what triggers that? Like what triggers a snow emergency and what do we do about that? I mean, we did get questions about why a certain area got cleared sooner than another one. Well, we need resources to move snow off of Cougar Creek Drive, for example. You know, if we have equipment working in a certain area and we know we need to move snow, you know, in and around that area, and we can get to it without signing it or deploying bylaw, we did that. We tried to be effective with what we had working in the areas, and but yeah, for sure, we need to, like, what are these trigger points? Is it an accumulation amount? Is it a forecast? Like, we have to establish that if we're going to.
Yeah, and sometimes the forecasts are wrong. Hey?
I think this one was.
That's...
You know, I think this one was in particular. It was challenging to deal with just from that perspective.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. My question's similar to Councillor Comfort's. There were quite a few vehicles that I feel like they parked their car to go away on holidays and left for 2 weeks. Like beautiful vehicles that should not normally be sitting on the street, and service vehicles, whether they be plumbing trucks, et cetera, that were parked on streets as well. And although I don't have a question necessarily, just sort of encouraging feedback that that you can't just park your car and then walk off for 2 weeks and expect that everything is going to be okay. I still see some of the red stickers from on some of them, particularly on Rundle, and it made your efforts so much easier over the course of the 2 weeks to try and clear those roads. And Most people have the ability to store their vehicles on their properties. But the only thing I will say is that I live with one of the toughest critics of snow and ice removal, and he actually had kudos to send to you. So he actually thought that the town did a really great job this time around, and usually I hear nothing positive about snow and ice removal in my home. So anyways, I'll pass that on to you.
Thanks. It was challenging, and we had a lot of wins. There were some misses, but I think it's important to know that we need to build off of what we did right.
Councillor Mara?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just too wanted to reiterate, I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you to you and your team. And you did your best with what you had available to you. I understand that there's not a lot of equipment in that available. Even if we had the money to do more, it wasn't available because of the holiday season. And I just thinking back in the 70s when we went 2 days where it was just snowmobiles. So we're a little spoiled in the fact that we have, it was fun. We are lucky that we have, at least we can do the emergency services and be on top of what's essential first, and then everything is secondary. So thank you to you and your team.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Seeley?
Climate change and thick ice. Just wondering about, I know Mr. Como talked on it, additional equipment that we might be looking at. But in the Arts Place parking lot and Civic Lane, there was really thick ice, and I think that's going to be ongoing. Do you have any thoughts about equipment that you might need moving forward?
Yeah, like I know there is equipment out there. We've got some smaller equipment that we use on pathways, and we have since used it since in 2020. Within the past week or 10 days, we've used it to some decent success. Accessing larger equipment that we might be able to use on a loader, for example, or is definitely something that I think we should look into. The freeze thaw is difficult. About 3 weeks ago, we had the rain and the snow, which presented almost as many challenges as the snow we did receive, and that's creating these huge ice ruts and windrows that even in roads that we had cleared out. So I think it makes sense to look into that and assess pricing and how we attack a strategy going forward.
Maybe even sharing with other municipalities that have similar issues.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Comfort?
So I just wanted to add to Councillor McCallum's kudos there. If she lives with the most difficult critic, I live with someone that's in the top 10, and he also was very impressed with your efforts. So.
Thanks for that.
One of the concerns that's being raised by the community right now, we're post the snow event, is that pathways and sidewalks are very icy. Is there something that you can do maybe now or in the future to address that with sand, et cetera?
We are out daily with this equipment. We have 2 units that have sand spreaders in the backs of them that we send out daily. There are a lot of hills in these areas. One of the challenges that we've seen with this type of an event is that you literally get these walls that build up as we go through them, and they melt and just work their way into the road system. So, we might deal with something first thing in the morning, and by 5 o'clock when it refreezes, we've got, a worse problem on our hands. But we do deploy that stuff every day. I think you can see, I know most of it was from the roadways, but our materials that were used was substantial this year. That was part of it as well.
Do we use the same pickle mix on the sidewalks that we use on the road, or is it just sand?
We do use the same, we take it from the same stockpile, yes.
So there is salt in it as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, well, we're hoping that the rest of the season is kind to you.
I appreciate your support on this. Thank you very much.
And we know that was really a dramatic situation you were dealing with. We were all dealing with it. And I think that's the big difference now, is that the town is so spread out. And when there's an event, it's throughout the whole town. And it's a very big town to try and manage all those pathways and roadways. And then we get visitors and, the extra burden of more and more people in the community. So I really I commend you for trying to manage it effectively, but we know it was very, very difficult.
Thanks for that. It was challenging. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, Councillor Updates, item E. Councillor Seeley has indicated that he would like to... 3:30, okay, so we're good for time. Councillor Updates, item E. Where are we here? Any questions for Councillor Seeley about the tourism conference that he attended? That was a very good report. Councillor Seeley, I'm glad that you attended a conference this month because the rest of us didn't really have very much to report this month. So, I had a question for Councillor Hillstad under his report with CCHC, the strategic objective to initiate the matching down deposit program and accessory dwelling grant program. Could you speak to that a little bit? That was a very good report you did, but it's good to highlight that.
Yes, so I'm just going to read straight from the report.
Sure.
But basically, both programs are 3-year pilot programs set to begin this year in January. Or at least one of them will begin, I think it's already been put out there, but the other one's waiting until to be actually go into effect once the land use bylaw has gone, the new land use bylaw has gone into effect. So the matching down deposit program is, in the first year, will only be applicable to PH owners and those on the PH wait list. The program will match an eligible applicant's down deposit dollar for dollar up to $25,000 for the purchase of a market unit. And restrictions apply, and cumulatively there's $150,000 available in 2020. The accessory dwelling grant program is designed to assist eligible applicants with offsetting the costs of constructing a new accessory dwelling or legalizing an existing accessory dwelling. Grant funding of up to $20,000 or 75% of the development costs, whichever is less, is available. And restrictions apply, and that has $100,000 available in 2020. So yeah, the matching down deposit program information was circulated to all existing PH homeowners and those on the PH waitlist January 31st, 2020, and interest has been very positive. Intake appointments have been booked, and then communication on the accessory dwelling grant program is to be circulated to the community by March 1st, and then it'll go into effect once the new land use bylaw comes into effect in April.
So I was interested in that because people have been asking me how they apply for the accessory dwelling unit program, and it will be through CCHC.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good thing to note. Thank you very much. That was a good report you did. CCHC has been very, very busy. Moving on to item number F, service area reports. Beginning with the CAO's office, item A. Question from Councillor Comfort.
Yes, I just wanted to say I'm very interested to hear once the CO is back and later on, once she's had a chance to actually go to the Canadian Mountain Network events, I think there'll be a lot for us to be learned given that's a federal program, and look forward to hearing how that goes.
Under General Manager of Corporate Services, Municipal Services, Councillor McCallum.
Well, under C2 for the Finance Department, I was wondering if you could, at some point, let me know what changes in COPTER have allowed us to give a full exemption to these two organizations, and whether it's a full exemption or is it just on their municipal property tax?
I have a input from the acting CAO.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Rogers.
The change was actually a better understanding in our own interpretation and a legal opinion to understand that there is a exemption period, or an exemption description within COPTER that actually makes people eligible for COPTER. It's kind of a double negative, but we determined that we were applying that by coming to council. We were actually taking a step we didn't need to take. And it was the full property tax exemption. We had previously waived the property tax, but still required the PAH and the seniors housing requisition, and that is actually not allowable under that copter legislation.
That's disappointing. Thank you very much.
So we had been waiting for a copter update. That's not on the radar with the current government, and so we'll be bringing forward our own policy to deal with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's an interpretation of the policy,
Yeah, of the MGA,
of,
yep.
of the copter regulation.
Copter regulations, yep.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any questions under, we're still under municipal services, corporate services? Municipal infrastructure? I think there's some interesting timelines that are laid out about the planning and development for the, applying the new planning regulations, and the dates are very clearly stated in this section. Councillor Comfort?
Sorry, I missed my opportunity there, did it again. I was wondering about the job posting for fire prevention officer, and I missed something, I think, that seems like a very worthy idea. I just wondered, did that come out of a recommendation from Walter Gaylor, like from the chief, or, because it's a new position, I gather?
So that recommendation came out of the Dillon staffing study and then the Dillon master plan. It wasn't Chief Gaylor's idea. It was out of those reports, and it was approved by council as part of the 2020 budget.
Thank you. Dr. Cottle? Any questions under engineering services? Facilities? I understand we'll be having an update about Elevation Place at the next council meeting in March. So that'll be good to have that information. Oh, next committee of the whole, sorry. Councillor Comfort?
Sorry, I did it again. I've got to be quicker on the draw here. Under engineering services, I was curious about the risk along the CP rail corridor, and it sounds like, I just wondered who will present that? Is that coming out of internally, or is that coming out of FCM, or I wasn't quite clear.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, can I put your microphone on? There we go.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, you were curious as to who was creating the data?
Yeah.
I know our engineering department is leading this. They have been working with, for example, the City of Calgary, who have a similar situation where they have a major rail line coming right through the middle. I'm not sure exactly the answer to that question, but we can certainly find out.
Just an update, you know, by email or something, just to know what's going on. And I think it is, there were a number of derailments in Eastern Canada prior to the holidays and over the holidays. So I think it may be on people's minds, certainly on mine. So I'll be eager to hear about that. So thank you for doing this work.
So that's under 2E, correct?
Yes.
And I think we have already done some, we've already addressed some of the setbacks along the rail line with recent developments. So I would see this as sort of a continuation of that.
Yes, my understanding
process.
is the conditions have changed. They're more stringent now. But yeah, if you walk along the power line, you can see a lot of the parking has been shifted to that location, and the buildings have moved farther away, closer to Bow Valley Trail. So if there was a derailment, it would just simply be cars that would be taken out and not sections of building that would be occupied by people.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, moving along. Anything else under facilities or public works? Councillor Comfort?
Okay, I'm on task here. So I was curious about the facility lighting replacement in Elevation Place. And
Could you tell us what item that is?
Sorry, it is under facilities and it's item A, second bullet.
Okay.
I just wanted to congratulate facilities for applying for and receiving a municipal climate change action grant for a project worth nearly $21,000 to pay for replacement lighting. And also, I have a question about, in the next bullet, about the Union Hall flooring that needed to be replaced because it failed, the cork flooring. So I just wondered about the spec for the new flooring. I'll get there.
And they found asbestos to mitigate under that flooring? So that added a little
Yes.
complication to the project?
Yep.
Can anybody speak to that? Mr. Camon?
I don't have any specific details, but we can certainly find out. If I understand the question correctly, is you would like to know what the specification of the new flooring?
Yeah, because
Okay.
it seems to me that, so I just wanted to make sure, my understanding is the kitchen in the Union Hall is a commercial kitchen.
Correct.
I just want to be assured that the spec is for commercial flooring. Because it would surprise me greatly that cork flooring would be an okay specification for a commercial kitchen. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, we can certainly let you know. I'm confident that whatever conditions are required, regulations, that we would be meeting those, but we can verify that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions under Public Works, Parks, Streets and Roads, Solid Waste Services? Nothing? Okay. So I think that concludes the service area reports. And then we can move on to item G1, Council Resolution Action List. Any questions or updates in that area? We're still on target there? Okay, no questions? Then we'll move on to item H, Board and Committee Updates. There are none. In camera, there are none. And if there are no other questions, I will move to adjourn the Committee of the Whole meeting of February 18th. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you.